This person has been going to a Buddhist center for some time and is a Buddhist, and they reconnected with an old friend who practices the Yoga Sutras, which is a Hindu, those are Hindu sutras, and also has a belief in a creator God. And this person took his friend to a Zen center, and his friend enjoyed the meditation but didn't like all the ritual. Yeah. So I was only wondering, my goodness, if he went to a Tibetan center, what would happen? Because so many Tibetan centers have a lot of ritual. So he was saying that, what his friend said was his difficulty with ritual stemmed from his Catholic upbringing, which he felt was fire and brimstone kind of indoctrination. Okay, so our friend was, trying to put things in perspective for him. And our friend actually comes from an Eastern Orthodox background. And he grew up, in a church which also has a lot of ceremony and ritual. But he said, let me read you what he said about his experience with it. Okay. From my personal standpoint, my Eastern Orthodox Christian upbringing, while not forced upon us in any way, was actually quite interesting, and I don't feel damaged by it in any way. Ritual in this particular Christian denomination is quite elaborate and even mystical. In retrospect, I found it quite beautiful, and perhaps it explains my comfort and familiarity with the beautiful rituals in the Tibetan tradition. So he's saying, I don't have the history and baggage that my friend has, so it was really hard for me to relate and to know what to do to help his friend. Okay, so this kind of thing is really quite common, and it's not limited to people who grew up Catholics. And having a problem with ritual also, it doesn't happen to all people who grew up Catholics. Okay, so there's no pervasion in any of this. Yeah. Sometimes people who grow up with a lot of ritual, like our friend, find it very beautiful, and they're actually quite attracted to the ritual in the Tibetan tradition. For example, or in the Zen tradition, like our friends at Shasta Abbey, their abbess designed all of their liturgy with Gregorian chant because that's what she studied and she knew it, and she wrote everything, and they have an organ and they play Gregorian chant and chant that way, and they all love it. Yeah, for me, that way doesn't work. That kind of music doesn't inspire me. But for the people at their abbey, many of whom grew up Catholic, they feel so comfortable with that ritual, so familiar with them. Other people grow up Catholic, or Jewish, or Protestant, or non-believers, doesn't matter what you are, and have a real resistance to ritual and ceremony because they feel it's just, kind of a procedure that you do with no real meaning in it, and that people think just doing the procedure itself is something virtuous. Yeah, and so it just seems like, why do this? Yeah, and actually, to tell you the truth, that's the way I used to think before I met the Dharma. I didn't like ritual before. I thought it was very boring and didn't have much feeling in it, and why do the same thing again and again, especially ritual somebody else wrote a long time ago. And I remember the first time I was ever taken into a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. This was a couple of years before I became a Buddhist, and I was trekking in Nepal, and we were in Jubesi, and they I think you've heard this story before, for some reason I went with 3 other friends, but I was the one that was taken into the Lama's room. It was very high, what's his name? One Rinpoche, and starts with a T. Anyway, I was taken into his room, and ignored him and looked at all the artwork, because what did I know? And then somebody came in and bowed to him, which is, you know, just kind of standard Buddhist practice. And I was horrified, totally horrified, because how I grew up, you never bowed to another human being. You know, maybe to your credit card you paid homage, you know, and to your car and to your refrigerator, but, you know, not to another human being. So I was just horrified. And when I first went, a couple of years after that, to my first Buddhist teachings, and the first talk before the lamas came, everybody's bowing, and I'm going, what kind of strange thing is this? You know, and women with shaved heads and men wearing skirts and, you know, all these pictures on the wall, because I grew up where any kind of, you didn't have pictures of human beings because the divine could not be expressed in the form of a human being, you know. And so there it is, all these people, but some of them didn't look quite like human beings. They were green, they were blue, they had many heads. You know, what was going on here? And then all the chanting in Tibetan, you know, and mandala offerings, and throwing rice, and all this kind of thing. I mean, I was just like, whoa. But it was amazing that usually me, who, you know, kind of, that is enough to push me out the door, I actually stayed. And I found that as I stayed, they explained what the rituals were all about, you know, and that the symbolism that happens when you bow, why you place your hands at the 4 places, what you think when you're going down, what you think when you're coming up. They explain what the mandala offering is and why we do it and how that's part of our practice. And so I began to understand that all these rituals are actually designed to transform our mind, and they aren't just the mere repetition of blah blah. And so for me, that was the real key, is understanding the meaning and the purpose, you know. And then when my teachers especially would go through some of the verses and explain line by line what they meant, then I could really see, oh yeah, when you say this, you're training your mind to think in a certain way that is actually helpful for you as a human being. Yeah, and so for me the key was really understanding things. Yeah, so I think in terms of here of, you know, what to do when you take a friend to a Dharma center and they're really put off by the ritual, is kind of what we tell people here. You don't have to do anything, you know, just observe, do whatever you feel comfortable with, and ask questions. And, you know, realize that you haven't yet received teachings on these things. So, of course, it's very natural to not want to engage in them, you know. And actually, I quite respect people who don't, who want to learn first before they engage in something. I think it's quite good. They're curious. They want to investigate. They don't just, you know, take things on blind faith. So, you know, encourage the person in that way, and then slowly, you know, enable them to start learning the meaning of these things, and to think about the meaning. And then when they feel comfortable, when they've understood the meaning, then they can start trying things out at their own speed, in their own way. Yeah, and I think that's a very good way to present things. And then also to say, you know, for some people, even after they've learned the meaning, even after they've checked things out, still ritual doesn't appeal very much to them. That's completely okay. The most important thing is that you learn the Dharma, and then you learn, you know, hearing or studying, contemplating and meditating, and that's the most important thing. And then you can add recitations and rituals and things as you wish. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of room for divergence in that. Also, another thing I say to people who have difficulty with rituals is that we all have our own rituals in our life. Yeah? If you look, when you get up in the morning, do you have a little ritual that you do every morning? Yeah, I mean, I get up, I make 3 prostrations, I go to the bathroom, I set up the altar, I pick up the kitty and, try and keep her calm. And then I do make a cup of tea and do my practice. And that's a ritual. I do it every morning. Yeah, every morning. No matter I'm sick, whatever's going on. Yeah. And so if we look in our lives, we all have little rituals that we do. Things that we do repetitively that give us a sense of stability in our lives, that give us, the opportunity to center our thoughts. Yeah, without every day having to think about, like when we get up, well, what am I going to do? I don't know. Yeah, we have our little morning ritual that we do. And so similarly, when you start practices, when you do some recitations or whatever, then it gives you a way that leads you into the practice where you can sit down and you don't have to think, well, now what do I do? What do I do? I remember what tradition I'm following and who my guides are, so I take refuge. I remember what my reason for doing this practice is, so I generate bodhicitta. And then, you take it from there. If people start to think that just the doing of the ritual is what creates virtue, that's not exactly it. Like I said, the purpose of the ritual is to transform our mind. So the Buddha was very aware of that because the Brahmins, they had very elaborate rituals, and you had to do things exactly in a particular certain way with no deviation in order to reap the merit from it. And if there was any deviation in how you did the ritual, it was very, very bad according to the Brahmanic tradition. Okay? So the Buddha actually said that kind of attitude is an affliction. Yeah, when you think that just doing the ritual itself without transforming your mind is the point of it, and taking refuge just in the external procedure without the mental transformation, he said was actually a wrong view. Yeah, so it's good to be quite clear about this. Yeah, and that helps people who have difficulty with rituals to understand, and it reinforces a kind of what their hesitancy is, and at the same time gives them a way to understand the purpose and the value of rituals. And even some Buddhist traditions say, well, we don't have very many rituals. They look at the Tibetans, you guys have so many rituals. But actually, when I've gone into the temples of those traditions, they have so many rituals. The thing is that when you're in the middle of something, you don't see it as a ritual. It's only when you're unfamiliar with it that you see it as a ritual. Yeah? And so some people say, oh, our tradition doesn't have nearly as many rituals. Well, yes it does, actually, because I go in and I don't know what to do, and you have a certain way of bowing and a certain way of sitting, and where the men sit and where the women sit, and how you take your food and in what order, and how you chant and in what language, and so it's just really interesting how we often don't see what we do as rituals, but what we see as what's unfamiliar as rituals. But actually all the Buddhist traditions have them. I think all religions, all faiths have them. Businesses have them, for goodness sakes. Many of you have worked in healthcare. Healthcare has rituals, don't you? Everybody, human beings have rituals, and it helps to stabilize and give some context to the mind. You were a teacher. When you went in the morning, you said good morning, and you had your little ritual, and you took attendance and everything. Yeah, so we all do that. Okay.